Okay, and since it's recording, I'll go back to the title slide. And so the agenda, I've got about 15 minutes of presentation material planned, and then 15 minutes of discussion. Like I say, we'll adjust as necessary. So the agenda, I'll cover the hypothesis of my presentation, a bit about large tech companies, a bit about radio and what we can learn from radio as it transitioned to software and IP, examples from the TV industry, the vendor landscape, and the implications. And then I do have additional presentation material if there's additional time left that we can go over. So Ernest Hemingway, he described the process of going bankrupt by saying that it happens gradually and then suddenly. Technology change in our industry happens gradually, then suddenly. And certainly, I think that speaks well to the times right now. We're living through a pandemic. We had been gradually moving towards IP and software and COTS and cloud, and the pandemic really made things move suddenly. In terms of engagement, again, disagreement on anything I say is welcome and encouraged. Interrupt at any time, and just, yeah, please no negative comments about any specific company. Disclosure, I work for a software company. I'm not going to speak about the company I work for. That's not appropriate in this setting. The company name that I work for is included in one slide, but there's 20 other software companies on the same slide. And I'm not predicting the demise of any specific companies. The hypothesis of, and hello, Luann, I see you've just joined, welcome.
I was really torn between this and live, which when I saw live you, I thought, well, is that really live? But no, I won't go there.
Well, we're glad to have you. Thank you. And I'll just say again, because I said to at the beginning, interrupt at any time. Happy to move in any direction that you'd like. So the hypothesis is that our industry is moving quickly from dedicated hardware solutions to software solutions. Sure, I suspect you'd all agree with that. Transforming a vendor technology company from a hardware company to a software company is very difficult, not impossible. And in this presentation, I'm going to give a tip of the hat to some companies that through vision, dedication, investment, engineering, talent, and leadership have transformed themselves or are well on their way to transforming themselves. So when a vendor company works to transition from a hardware company to a software company, there's, from my research, from my perspective, there's 5 possible outcomes. Success, of course, they can achieve it through engineering talent, effort, and leadership. They can become a smaller company, and we see some of that in our industry. Companies that have been traditionally hardware companies becoming smaller and some layoffs. They can acquire software companies, and one recent example is Ross acquiring PrimeStream. There are some companies that don't survive the transition. And there are some hardware companies that start selling software products produced by other companies, so sort of third-party products that they roll into their portfolio. There are new companies that are software-first companies that arrive on the scene. And we're seeing that. Not only is the way we work dramatically changing, it's different companies, a different mix of companies providing the solutions. For those of you, and Stefan, I'm not sure if you work at a facility or Dave, but for engineers working at a facility, you've probably transformed yourself from a hardware engineer to a software engineer. You're doing less soldering, less screwdriver work, and more, certainly more coding, more configuration, more looking at a screen and managing software applications. A question, hypothetical question, I don't know, not hypothetical, please answer. Could you name a company in our industry that has transformed itself from a great hardware company to a great software company? Anybody? It's a tough one. And I do have a couple of examples that I want to recognize. Paul, I see you unmuting.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to spoil your, you go.
Okay.
Well,
yeah,
we saw a presentation earlier, okay, from MediaKind that blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Communicaid Ericsson, right? They built rack mount encoders and stuff, and they just blew us away with MLAI. So
Yeah. Yeah. And Luann, did you say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, a while back, I remember when Harmonic tried to make that move from hardware to software. I don't know if I would say they got there, but they did. They were an early proponent of it.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and Harmonic, you win a prize because Harmonic is on my slide where I give a tip of the hat, and they have done a great job. I'm hearing. I don't work for Harmonic. We do projects where they're involved, so we see a bit. But yeah, they seem to have done it or are well on their way to doing it. So tip of the hat to them. The media facility of the future, again, just my opinion, but it will have very little dedicated hardware compared to a facility built now or 20 years ago. Well, in fact, a media facility built now will look something like this as well. Very little dedicated hardware. So cameras, microphones, monitors, lighting equipment, that's not going to be transformed to software. Everything else that has been typically done with hardware is transforming, moving to software solutions. So a media facility of the future will have a ton of COTS hardware and a ton of powerful software applications. It'll have storage, switch fabric, compute platform, and software applications. Of course, it'll be hyper-connected as well to other facilities, to the cloud, and to the home for work from home solutions. The story of the typewriter. The typewriter I submit to you is or was a media device. It was a hardware device, and it was replaced by a software application running on COTS hardware. So replaced by word processing running on computers. The typewriter, I want to give a tip of the hat as well to the typewriter, invented in 1868, literally a tool used to change the world. Of course, it was people operating it. It was a tool, but great works of literature, inspired revolutions, an incredible life, but replaced by software solutions, and the companies that made typewriters did not make the transition, could not make that move to software. The story of TV news in, say, the 70s and even into the 80s, TV news was a hardware implementation. It was videotape companies that made VTRs. It was people on intercoms being told when to press buttons on VTRs. It was field recorders recording on videotape and bringing those back into the facility. I remember the first Avid demo I saw was in the early 90s. So around the beginning of the 90s, Avid came on the scene. Delete is another solution. Now these are software solutions that provided solutions to the news industry, to TV news, and as well Adobe Premiere used for news editing. And that hardware solution that those hardware companies provided, the videotape machines and field recorders on cameras, that essentially went away. The VTR portion, the hardware portion of news within a facility moved to these software companies. The growth of COTS solutions in media facilities. This is meant to cover about the last 20 years. So a media facility about 20 years ago would have about 10% COTS hardware in some form and 90% purpose-built hardware. Over the past 20 years, that's been flipped to where now a new facility has 90% COTS hardware, switches and servers, and just 10% purpose-built hardware. The COTS vendors you're familiar with, I'll note Cisco certainly provides both switches and compute, but the mix shown here of switch vendors and server vendors, NVIDIA with their acquisition of Mellanox has now a switch offering, a network switch. And I would even say it's not just servers and switches functioning as COTS hardware in media facilities. It's also phones and tablets. So the ability to configure systems, to monitor systems, to look at video, streamed video. Now you have the capability to do that on phones and tablets. Even communications, is a phone and a tablet are used for that. Software solutions in media facilities. Again, going back about 20 years, the mix of solutions, software was just about 10% of the solutions in a media facility, and purpose-built hardware about 90%. And gradually over 20 years, that's been flipped. And now it's 90% software in facilities. Here's a shot of companies that would be included in the subject I said of new software first companies arriving on the scene that have a growing presence in facilities. So these are a mix of, cloud editing software, orchestration companies, playout companies, cloud providers, orchestration, data visualization, machine learning, security, dashboards, all these things, and workflow, media workflow management. All these things now are software first companies with a growing presence in our industry. And I want to call out particularly one company as an example. The video production switcher has been often mentioned as the last thing to be replaced by software, the hardest thing to be replaced by software. And now this company called vMix has a software production switcher. And in the large media companies that we talk to, some of them are deploying this as a solution. So moving away from the hardware vendors, and the hardware vendors that make production switchers are moving as well to this solution. And I'll say, Luann, you're with Panasonic, correct?
No, I was actually at Ericsson before it became MediaKind.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then Nevion.
You're at Nevion now? Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
No, I was. Now
You
I'm
were.
at Telestream.
You're
just
at Telestream.
to really confuse you.
Oh
Yeah.
Man, okay. Yeah, and the ubiquitous card cages and cards that we've had in our facilities for so long, everything, all the functions shown on this screen that were done in frames with cards can now and have now been replaced by software solutions. An incredibly long list. The IP gateways, as our industry moved to IP, the IP gateway business, and it was substantial, was a spike in business for hardware companies because a gateway is a hardware solution. It requires an SDI connection, so it requires a dedicated piece of hardware. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on hardware companies for gateway solutions. That's going away because endpoints are all becoming IP. What I'll call crossing the chasm. For hardware companies that decide to become software companies, it's tough. Again, not impossible, but it's a tough task. Software companies have a different culture, a different business process, different development processes, different timescales. Customers, of course, want OpEx pricing, and that's only possible with software. Customers want to move to the cloud as well, and of course, that's only possible with software. This is my tip of the hat. Luann, thank you for mentioning Harmonic. I think they've been brave and done well. And as well, AWS Elemental used to sell dedicated hardware appliances. They've now moved entirely to software that runs on COTS hardware. In this slide, I've attempted to map out large tech companies, and I've included the top 10 tech companies in the world, not in our industry, just generally, top 10 tech companies by revenue in the world, and also some tech companies from our industry, and try to map them out in terms of where they would sit on a continuum from hardware to software companies. So Samsung, Sony, Panasonic, LG, hardware companies, HP, NVIDIA, Cisco, hardware companies, Dell hardware company, Arista hardware, Taiwan Semiconductor, one of the 10 largest companies in the world, a hardware company, software companies, Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, and I should say as well, some of these hardware companies do make software, often software to configure their own products, but they also make some software products. But largely, as I attempt to map them on this is where I put them. And you see not many of them are close to that center line. So Google, Microsoft, Alibaba, Tencent. Alibaba and Tencent also in the top 10 worldwide. There is one company that is in the top 10 worldwide that I haven't yet shown, and I'll show now, but would anybody like to guess what it is?
John Deere?
Just, yeah. Excellent guess.
Apple?
Very good, Stefan. Yeah, exactly. And not only does it straddle that center line, it's also the #1 company in the world. It's so incredibly successful. And I think, my perspective, Apple is extremely unique, and it's their greatest differentiation from other companies. They're an absolutely fantastic hardware company and a fantastic software company. That's really hard to be, but from their inception, they were both. They started off doing both. It doesn't seem to happen these days when companies are formed. Companies seem to do one or the other, and it's very rare. As you see, all these companies are strong on one end of the spectrum, and Apple is unique. Could any of you name a tech company in not just our industry, but worldwide, any industry that has transformed itself from a hardware company to a software company?
Well, I mean, you could put TRS-80 Radio Shack, and you could also put Commodore in that middle there, but they didn't seem to make it very far, did they?
Yeah, true. Yeah, true. Yeah.
I think BlackBerry did it.
Oh.
They went
Same
from
hardware,
a phone company to basically a secure software.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. I guess I would wonder if they're an example of a company that became smaller while they did that.
Well, I think they transcended from the hardware side to the software side, even though I think Apple crushed their hardware side. So
yeah, good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point.
I mean, another, it's really history, but a company that has always been fascinating to me is IBM. That in the 70s had more than 60% of the worldwide computer market.
Yeah.
And of course, this is a market that has exploded since, but so, they transformed themselves to a certain degree. I mean, I don't know how much hardware they are still doing, but they have become also much smaller and much less relevant than they used to be. I mean,
they were right there in the middle, in the beginning of the PC revolution, right? I mean, IBM PC launched it. I can prove it to you. I can pick one up over here and show you.
But even before, there were, computers meant IBM.
Yeah.
In the 60s and 70s.
Absolutely. And Stefan, great comment and perspective. And I was actually thinking of IBM. I was going to mention them as well. And as an example, some people do bring it up, and it's a great example. And if from my own research, it seems that IBM has transformed themselves from a hardware company to a services company.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you agree? Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
So what is the magic formula to making the transition?
Well, I think it's.
Looks like there isn't one.
Well, yeah, I think it from Harmonic, the example of Harmonic and AWS Elemental. I would say investment, engineering talent, leadership, commitment. It's those things, and it's visionary leadership, right? Because you had to realize a while ago that it was going to move to software. Anybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Could you argue that it's thanks to Intel processors instead of FPGAs?
Well, that's part of the shift, right?
Yeah,
I would. Yeah. I would. That's a really good point too, as well, Luann, and a big subject. I think you could talk about FPGA versus CPU, and from my perspective, and anyone tell me if you disagree, but FPGA is not software. It's kind
You know,
of
you could
Well, it's
ask.
quasi.
Yeah, sorry.
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Stefan.
No, you could ask yourself whether, you know, some of the companies who were able to do it, I mean, whether they are the same company at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, how
Yeah.
much of the culture has been, if I go back to my example of IBM, you know, I don't think that the IBM of the 70s or 80s has anything to do with what it has become as a service company in terms of
Yeah.
how it deals with customers or everything. I mean, and the reason why I was interested, because, you know, I'm from a software company, but the reason I was interested in that presentation is because I do believe that even within the software world today, there's the transformation of the software world today, especially moving to cloud and to solutions that are very, very, very different to the type of software that we were doing 20 years ago, is such that the culture shift, I mean, not all software companies will survive the radical transformation of the software industry. I mean, that's my, you know, and this is why I was interested in that conversation, not so much because, you know, not so much about, you know, what happens to hardware company, though as a joke, I would say, I was hoping your answer is no, but but more, you know, what does it take to because it's you know, as a software company that started, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, the type of software we were making 20 or 30 years ago, which was basically trying to replicate in the digital world what some pieces of equipment were doing.
Yeah.
You know, you had a tape recorder and you would do, a digital recorder that works on a regular PC with maybe some hardware or maybe even no hardware. But now it is something completely different that we are talking about. So I'm just, you know, for me, it's a cultural shift in terms of how you conceive even what software is. That is very interesting. So
that's a great point, Stefan. Thank you.
The culture shift, you know, is kind of interesting, and Apple probably is the only company I can think of that started out with their original philosophy of what to build, and that even to this day they've held on to it, and that's both the hardware and the software, right? And they've failed at both over the years, but the past 15 years at Apple, they've gotten it right every time, and it's incredible that they can sit in the middle like that. But boy, one more thing Roy, I'll mention about hardware companies: if you're a hardware company and you want to move your products to software, you have a huge cost burden during that period of evolution, because you got to keep that hardware product fresh and alive and for sale and supported, right? And then even once you have your software products, you still are going to have customers wanting you to continue to feature out your hardware products because the markets overlap, and if that ramp is 5 years long, right, you've got this huge burden. The new revenue had better offset that pretty quick. So that's one of the reasons hardware companies find it so hard, I think, is that the cost to get to a pure software thing is that it's all additional expense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great point, Paul. Thank you. Yeah. Reminds me, you mentioning that, it reminds me of a great book, The Innovator's Dilemma, about technology.
I was thinking about that book when you were talking. All the more that, you know, we are talking here about companies that still exist, but, you know, there is an ocean of companies that do no longer exist. I mean, you know, look in our industry. I think there was a company called Ampex, I think, if I remember correctly, that was doing tapes. I mean, I only remember because, you know, we at that time we had a very small booth at NAB, and they had a humongous booth, and they just, you know, and over a few years they totally disappeared. Totally.
Well, they invented videotape. I mean, they were the first ones to commercialize professional audio tape, and
2-inch quad.
Yep.
Yeah.
They just whole thing just went down.
It was one of the Dolby. It was Thomas Dolby that was involved in the invention of the videotape machine, right?
Thomas Dolby's a musician. You're thinking of Ray Dolby.
Ray Dolby. Pardon me. Thank you.
Wrong Dolby, no relation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Brilliant genius.
Yeah.
He was actually a university student when he invented the modulation demodulation for the videotape recorder. He was actually the inventor of the mod demod. Yeah, just an amazing story, Ampex. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man.
And they just missed the boat. They did not see anything but videotape in the future. And
Yeah.
they were chasing after Sony, who didn't see videotape in the future, and son of a gun, servers.
Yeah. Great example. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I just looked at the time. So we have 1 minute left. This has been an absolutely great discussion. I don't care that I didn't get to all my slides, but really, really excellent discussion and great perspectives. I really appreciate it. And as part of my duties from this conference, I'm supposed to also tell you, and I encourage you, and I'm going to be on the broadcast trivia one, but there's social events with trivia contests you can attend. So again, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Roy.
All right.
You.
You too. We'll look at your
You
slides
too.
after the fact when they're posted.
Okay. Yeah. Please do.